A poignant tale of young love lost, years of silence, and a quiet reunion where healing begins not to reclaim the past, but to find peace in what remains. In the shimmering heat of the 2002 summer, when cheers echoed across every street for South Korea's once-in-a-lifetime World Cup run, a quieter story was unfolding in the shadows of all that celebration. It began not in the grand stadiums or the crowded squares, but in the still corners of a high school classroom, where two hearts beat with the quiet chaos of first love. Jang Guk was the kind of girl who was used to being unnoticed. Modest, hardworking, and soft-spoken, she belonged to a family that lived paycheck to paycheck, rooted in honesty and endurance. Yoo Jun-soo, on the other hand, seemed to move through life with a quiet confidence born of privilege. His family expected greatness from him, shaped by a long legacy of tradition and success. On the surface, there was little to tie them together, but love, as it often does, bloomed not in logic but in moments. Small glances, shared secrets, and an unspoken pull that felt fated. Their love was both fragile and fierce, lived in whispers and hidden corners, and was forged in the soft defiance of youth. What they had was real, in a way only teenagers can believe it to be, untouched by cynicism, untouched by the world. It was the kind of love that made them believe they could outrun everything: class, expectation, and consequence. But life rarely grants such grace. One stolen moment, one breathless decision, and everything changed. An unplanned pregnancy shifted their world overnight. The weight of that truth fell heavily on their shoulders. Yet they didn't run. They held each other, trembling but brave, and chose to face the future. They reached for the approval of their parents, expecting resistance, receiving resignation. Jun-soo's father gave his reluctant consent, his voice laced with warnings and disappointment. The fragile agreement that followed was more obligation than blessing, thin as glass and just as breakable. Then came the tragedy. The miscarriage wasn't just the loss of a child, it was the death of their imagined future. The moment came suddenly, during an argument between the families, when words turned sharp and tempers flared. Jang Guk, caught in the middle, was shoved in an accident, they said. But the result was irreversible. The baby was gone. In the silence that followed, grief bloomed into blame. The mothers, who had never accepted the relationship, turned colder still. Their disdain, once veiled, was now naked and bitter. In the eyes of their families, the love had turned poisonous. Jang Guk, now grieving, was sent away, exiled not just from Seoul but from the life she had started to build. Her mother, desperate to erase the scandal and protect what little pride they had left, arranged for her departure without warning. A single plane ticket, a suitcase, and the finality of goodbye. She was gone before the season changed. In the United States, she became someone else. She changed her name to Jang Dal-rae and lived under that new identity like it was armor. In a country that knew nothing of her past, she learned how to breathe again. The pain didn't vanish, but time taught her how to hide it. She studied relentlessly, built a quiet career, and learned to live alone. She never spoke of the baby, never mentioned Jun-soo. The memories stayed buried beneath long work hours and sleepless nights. Even joy became something muted, safe from being too bright. Back in Korea, Jun-soo was left behind, tethered to a crumbling legacy. His family's fortune, once solid, began to erode. A series of failed business deals, lawsuits, and debt turned privilege into pressure. With his younger siblings still in school and his parents clinging to their name, Jun-soo abandoned his dreams and stepped into a life of duty. The boy who once sketched quietly in the corners of notebooks, who dreamed of studying abroad, became a man with tired eyes and silent regrets. He never chased after Jang Guk. Not because he stopped loving her, but because he had no right to ask her to stay. The years passed unkind and fast. By the time 12 had gone by, both were strangers to the people they used to be. Dal-rae returned to Seoul not because of longing, but for work. She came back a different woman, self-possessed, sharp, and quiet in a way that made people wonder. She had learned to navigate life alone, and she planned to keep it that way. Her heart was still hers, but heavily guarded, its walls built not from fear, but from the knowledge that love, once broken, doesn't return the same. She didn't seek Jun-soo out. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Their reunion wasn't dramatic. It happened on neutral ground professionally, coincidentally, almost painfully mundane. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? The girl he loved was gone. In her place stood a woman with new eyes, new clothes, and a name that kept the past buried. Dal-rae chose silence. She let him look past her, let him talk without realizing. She didn't know why, whether it was pride or protection, or just the need to hold something of her own. But as they began to orbit each other again, familiarity bloomed beneath the surface. He felt drawn to her without understanding why. She watched him struggle with his own life, his exhaustion, and the cracks beneath his composed exterior. And in those quiet exchanges, something old stirred to life. But the past is never just memory. Their families, still locked in bitterness, hovered at the edges of their new beginning. Junsu's mother remained proud, hard, and unrelenting. Dalrei's mother, still wounded by what had been lost, warned her not to open old doors. The past, they said, should stay buried. But fate had already started unearthing it. The slow unraveling began with familiarity, the quiet kind that creeps in without warning. Junsu found himself watching Dalrei with a sense of déjà vu he couldn't explain. There was something in the tilt of her head, the way her eyes lingered on the past without speaking of it. It gnawed at the edges of his memory, but never enough to break through. She remained a mystery, yet strangely comforting, like a song he had forgotten the words to, but still knew by heart. She stayed quiet, even as he drew closer. The interactions became more frequent, their conversations more personal. Circumstance kept throwing them together at meetings, community events, and accidental run-ins that no longer felt accidental. His interest in her grew with each encounter, and though she remained guarded, a silent current passed between them. It was familiarity. It was recognition without certainty. Each moment they shared was a mirror, reflecting their former selves. For Dalrei, being near him again felt like standing at the edge of an old scar, healed, but still tender. She saw the boy he had been, hidden beneath the layers of responsibility and disappointment. She saw the man who had loved her once with reckless abandon. But she also saw the years in his shoulders, the quiet grief he carried like a second skin. She wanted to tell him. Every time she stood near him, the truth rose like a tide inside her. But something always held her back. Fear, maybe, or guilt, or simply the knowledge that the past didn't offer neat resolutions. Her identity had become a wall she couldn't tear down without collapsing everything she'd rebuilt. But walls crack under pressure. It wasn't a single moment that broke her silence, but a series of smaller ones. The way he smiled at her like he used to. The way he once looked lost in her presence. And most of all, the way he began to speak of regret about choices made, time wasted, and people lost. The weight of what they both left unsaid became too heavy to carry. When she finally revealed the truth, it shattered the rhythm they had built. Junsu's reaction was not explosive but seismic. A deep shift beneath the surface. Shock turned quickly to pain, then betrayal, then silence. The memories, long buried, returned with cruel clarity. The miscarriage, the farewell that was never his to make, the questions that haunted him, and the realization that the woman he had been unknowingly opening his heart to was the same girl who had once held it completely. He pulled away. The distance that followed was different from the first time. This time, they were adults. There was no one to force them apart, no flight to board, no scandal to silence them. Only the weight of their shared history and the damage it had done. Dalrei didn't chase him. She had learned too well that some silences must be respected. She returned to her routine with mechanical precision, but everything felt dimmer now. The life she had so carefully rebuilt began to tremble at its foundations. Being near him had awakened a part of her that had remained dormant for years, the part that still wanted to be seen, to be forgiven, and to be understood. Junsu too was unraveling. In the days that followed, he found himself revisiting their past in fragments. Moments he had tried to forget now returning with unbearable sharpness. He went back to the places they had once claimed in secret. The old school courtyard, the park bench where they had first dreamed of a shared future, the hospital where it had all ended. Grief returned, but this time it was not only for the child they had lost. It was for the years, the silence, and the damage left unchecked. He realized how deeply he had buried his feelings, how he had chosen survival over healing, and how, even after all this time, the pieces of her still lived inside him. Reconnection came quietly. It wasn't a reunion built on grand gestures, but on honesty, on facing their past not as victims but as survivors. They began to speak, not to reclaim what they once had, but to acknowledge what they had endured. Forgiveness became a process, not a gift. They sat with each other's pain. They allowed it space. They learned the language of their shared silence. The families, however, remained unchanged. Junsu's mother held tightly to her bitterness, refusing to welcome Dalrei back into the fold. Her pride had long become armor, and she wore it too well to let it go. Dalrei's mother, weary and hardened, warned her daughter not to romanticize the past. Both women clung to the belief that time apart was evidence that the relationship had never been meant to last. But Dalrei and Junsu had changed. They were no longer the desperate teenagers clinging to each other to escape. They were adults now, forged by grief, shaped by absence. Their love was no longer a rebellion. It was a reckoning. a quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost and what might still be salvaged. Their reconciliation was subtle. It showed itself in long walks without destination, in the way they stood beside each other in rooms that once kept them apart, in the rare moments of stillness when no words were needed. They didn't promise forever again. Not this time. They promised presence. In a world that had taught them to expect pain, they found solace in simply choosing each other, one moment at a time. By the end of their story, there was no grand conclusion, no wedding, no cinematic kiss under the rain, just a new beginning. Two people, weathered by life, standing quietly together at the edge of something uncertain but real. Because love, they had learned, isn't always about return. Sometimes it's about recognition. Sometimes it's about grace. And sometimes it's about finding your way back not to the beginning, but to each other.